Hello. Some of you might not realize it, but there's an early Marx and a later Marx. Marx was not always a communist. In fact, he didn't become a communist until later on in his life. And when he was in college, when he first started out his intellectual career, socialism and communism wasn't really an issue at that time yet. It was the fight was between Protestants, Catholics, Pietists, conservatives, liberals, Hegelians, Romantics, and the Lutheran and Protestant German Prussian state. But yeah, Marx started off as a Romantic, not a Hegelian, not a communist. And Romantics, it was all about finding the romantic self and transcending the world, and eventually there should be creating a spiritual unity within the world. And it had a dark and brooding tendency, especially with Marx. In fact, a romantic meant something different then. Now romantic means the quest to have the children's, or the quest to seduce a woman or seduce a man, mutual seducing. But back then it was more about emotion and transcendence and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I shall read to you some of Karl Marx's emo poetry. I am caught in endless strife, endless ferment, endless dream. I cannot conform to life, will not travel with the stream. And the next poem is Song of the Stars. The first poem is not called that. Let me find it real fast. It was called Feelings. This is Song to the Stars by Marx, back when he did emo poetry when he was a romantic. You, the stars, are false images, faces of radiant flame, hearts, warmth, and tenderness, and soul you cannot claim. A mockery is your shining of action, pain, desire. On you is dashed all yearning and the heart's song of fire. Grieving we must turn gray, end in despair and pain, then see the mockery that earth and heaven remain. Yeah, see, he was very dark and brooding. This freaked his father out, by the way. His father was an Enlightenment, very hardcore Enlightenment guy, and he found his emo poetry and his romanticism freaking crazy. So they had some conflicts. But yeah. The problem that Marx had with it, though, is that he sort of felt like in his search for transcendence and finding the romantic self, his life would get happier and happier and happier and cooler and cooler and cooler and more livable and more livable. But the opposite was true. Everybody was like, what the hell, what's going on? And they didn't understand Marx. This his wife, Jenny von Westphalen, and his father, Heinrich Marx. And also, he ended up feeling eventually like the material world and his romantic philosophy were not coinciding. When I say philosophy, I don't mean opinion. I mean like his systematic view, his own Wissenschaft. It wasn't really all that systematic of romanticism, but his whole mode of life of romanticism was not conforming to reality. And he started to worry that all philosophy had this problem of being too spiritual in a sense, being too transcendent, being too separated from reality. So he thought Hegelianism would be the trick. That was sort of his hope anyway. Hegelianism he saw as a good way to combine the spiritualness, which is, I don't like that word, because it has different meanings now, that the religious right second power. I didn't mean spiritual in terms of Jesus and Buddha, but spiritual like ideas, very hardcore abstract ideas. It was a unity of abstract ideas in the material world. So yes, he thought it was great. Also, like almost all Hegelians, he saw himself in the Western world even as following this pattern of naturalness, spiritualness, and finally a synthesis. Like, I think even Nietzsche had it, and Thus Spake Zarathustra, and Stirner had it, and the other two guys mentioned, Brouwer and Ruge, also had this idea. But basically, when you first come out as a person, you're very natural, nature-oriented. You don't have any abstract ideas. This is, I guess, Rand would call it concrete-bound. But yeah, concrete-bound, I guess you could say. You don't think of justice or right and wrong, just feeling. There's pain, pleasure. I feel this way, so I'll do it. I want, so I go. It's entirely nature-oriented. There's no abstract ideas. There's no complex thinking. And then the second stage is the antithesis to that thesis, which is the overly spiritual, abstract, kind of devoid from reality spiritualness that he believed he was in during the Romantic period. The problem with this is it's so abstract that you sort of create your own world, and there's a conflict between what the world really ought to be, you think, and how the world actually is. To the point where you can't really get anywhere with your philosophy. Your system that you've created, he even wrote like 300-page book on law, trying to create a philosophy of law, and then he realized it's too abstract. Can't bring it down to earth for people. The final synthesis of the two, thesis and antithesis, is supposed to be the systematic philosophy, which he thought is what he got in Hegelianism. Come on. That was the hope, anyway. That was the main idea. The last part of this chapter, there's actually 2 parts to each of the guys' things, so there's really like 6 chapters. So this particular chapter ended with how Marx liked Hegelianism because he thought Hegelianism would unite everything and be a great reconciler of all views. And at first he was a little disheartened because he went into Hegelianism and realized there's no like unified Hegelian front. Hegelians are caught in the factions, particularly the conservative and the radical faction. And they started to realize that Hegelianism needs conflict, it needs contradiction, it needs fighting, infighting to keep it vital. Otherwise it becomes complacent. It wouldn't be Hegelianism anymore. It needs to be constantly debating, constantly, I guess it's dialectic. Hegelianism requires dialectic, a dialectic method of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So constant conflict within itself. Constant conflict within the Hegelian movement in order to keep dialectic and Hegelianism alive, really. Which makes sense. It's a philosophy on the fight of contradictions, so why shouldn't it have a conflict of contradictions that should hopefully evolve further and further and further towards the truth and the fulfillment of spirit and all that jazz. That's pretty much it for this. There's one last chapter, and then there's an concluding chapter, so I'll probably hit both of those in the next video. That's all. Bye.